Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. As you have heard, I wrote quite a lot on the topic of post-communism, but I must say that I have never written anything concentrated on the concept of anti-communism, and this is precisely what the organizers asked me to do, to tell something about anti-communism. And that actually it motivated me quite a lot and helped me also to understand something which I haven't understood. As I said, I thought that anti-communism is a sort of, tactical concept of a certain practical, pragmatical, Western democratic policy against the challenge of communism to protect and save the free world. Nothing serious. Although this is already, in this idea of reactivity, of reactive concept, is something that has a lot to do with the concept of historical revisionism, which simply tells that fascism is a sort of overreaction to the original totalitarian sin, which is communism. Secondly, I also don't think that anti-communism is an ideology constructed, as a sort, again, ideological counter formation to the ideology of communism, communist ideology. And I even think that which is might sound as a provocation, but it has become some sort of working point in my research. It might be that anti-communism is older than the communism itself. But what really it is, anti-communism is constitutive of the post-communist reality. And this is why it has survived the collapse of communism. I mean, this is the first dilemma. Why do we have anti-communism if we don't have communism? Why do we have this counter concept if there is no adversary? Why it has survived? This would be my question, and I will try to answer this question. It has deep, as I said, deep historical roots, much deeper, and this is again my point, it might be older than communism itself, much deeper than, historically, October Revolution, idea of, Marxism, etc. If you ask me precisely when I became aware of the survival of anti-communism after the collapse of communism, of some sort I might call sustainability, anti-communist sustainability, it was actually in Prague, in preparation for my book. I did some research, and then I went to the Museum of Communism in Prague. I don't know whether you have seen. It's a funny institution. It's very, very kitschy. It's not serious. But in this, precisely, in being this open anti-communist kitsch, it tells quite a lot. And what was first, and at the entrance, what I saw were two posters. On one poster, there was, this Russian matryoshka, these puppets you put one in another. Yeah? But it was with teeth of a shark. And there was also Russian bear, but Russian bear was with Kalashnikov. And then I was fascinated because I said, what I saw is actually very sophisticated and ambitious cultural translation of what once was universal or concept of modern universal emancipation, communism. Suddenly, it got a picture of a particular cultural identity. It was possible to reduce the whole story of communism to something like Russian identity. It was, after the fact, after the real Russian political anti-communism, after the masses in Moscow went to the street and claimed, the end of the Soviet Union to liberate themselves, but still, it somehow, stayed attached, communism, to this identity. So it has survived in the form of experience of a traumatic cultural difference. And today it functions perfectly. And poor Russians, being totally anti-communist, cannot liberate themselves from this package from the past. Somehow, practically anti-communist, they seem to carry on this legacy. So, in short, the post-communism was obviously able to reinvent itself in the realm of identity politics, to translate itself into the language of identity politics. This is the form of its survival. And let me now address the problem of anti-communism. Communism in its new language, which is obviously Russian. I actually learned Russian in school, and I will tell you 1-2 sentences in Russian. Я не верю в революцию. Истинная жизнь происходит там, где совершаются незаметные изменения в душе людей. Translate. I don't believe in revolution. A true life emerges there where the imperceptible changes in human souls take place. And this sounds truly like, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy. In fact, it is. I did some research and I found out that it is sort of a slightly adapted point Tolstoy made on Dostoevsky's figure of Raskolnikov, in Crime and Punishment. This is this idea, we don't believe in revolution. Essential transformation takes place deep in a soul. But what makes these thoughts so interesting today is the fact that, also in Russian, that they are taken from a video clip the CIA recently, last week, posted on Telegram and other social media to recruit new spies in Russia. You can find it on YouTube. It's a CIA video. More precisely, its purpose is, and I quote, to have Russians come to us and deliver information the United States needs. And it ends with instructions, how to use Tor browser, how to, become CIA spy. Well, in terms of ideology, however, this ad is interesting because it does not use usual Western rhetorics, when USA, when they want to provoke or push some regime change, they use this typical package, ideological, free and independent media, democracy, strong civil society, rule of law, the whole this ideological package. Nothing of this you hear. The whole rhetoric of freedom is absent, open society, etc. So the proper addressee in this case is not, for instance, a Russian citizen, a political being, Russian, who would think of how to change Russian society, for better in a Russian social activity. Rather, the real addressee is a deep Russian soul, the secret intimacy of individuals, where, as it is explicitly stated, true transformation takes place. You know, if Adorno would read it, he would really say, "Wow, what an jargon of authenticity in this even, you know, Heideggerian about spiritual deepness, etc." But there is one more crucial element in this spy ad: the message, and it is in fact a showcase of a very sophisticated cultural translation. The message is clear and very, very simple. Don't bother yourself with changing your reality. Forget revolution and let us do the regime change instead. So, behind this purely pragmatical purpose, to keep the events on the ground under one's own control, which is the task of CIA, obviously, the call to forget revolution reveals an underlying deep fear of an encounter with an unexpected and unpredictable historical event. In short, a fear of being exposed to the genuine contingency of historical praxis. In other words, yes, the United States want to change in Russia, want to do it itself, you know, but not too much, not a revolution, not an event that cannot be controlled. So what at first glance looks like a well thought out strategy of rational foreign policy is in fact deeply rooted in a defense mechanism that has been developed and improved since the end of the Second World War, if not earlier. However, far beyond the sphere of state politics. Rather, it was the sphere of world literature. These were the questions of truth, of history, and revolution. And these questions were this sphere of discourses, of thinking, of art, of culture. This was the primal target of secret operations of CIA in this much broader realm of theory, also epistemology. And this is actually in this sphere where the authentic anti-communism was forged. This sphere of discourses, of theories, of art, of culture, is the forge where the anti-communism was crafted, so to say. Let me give you a few examples. It's the story about very well-organized cooperation of, for instance, American intelligence agencies and private foundations like Rockefeller, Ford, Carnegie, American military, and institutions of American foreign policy. And this influence, which is interesting, it is very well documented. Let me give you an example from the field of modern epistemology, history of modern humanities, recent history of modern humanities. You have probably heard of so-called area studies. Area studies is a field of research and interdisciplinary field of research and scholarship which focus specific on geographic regions and, what is most important, culturally defined areas. This is not, it's not about, the map of of the world and geographic regions. These are areas that are mapped culturally. What differentiates areas from territories is that areas are created by a knowledge that is produced outside of these areas. So this is, countries have territories, but areas of the areas studies are the knowledge is produced on remote, distant spaces. In the modern structure of the humanities, which itself mirrors the colonial domination and its cognitive and epistemic effects, the area studies became an anti-communist weapon of the Cold War, a weapon against the communist threats from the first and foremost Soviet Union and China from the very beginning, but at the same time, and this is double bind of the area studies, they were created so as to protect United States from the emancipatory projects of the anti-colonial movement. So anti-communism is also anti-colonialism in Africa and Asia. It is a paradigmatic case of a joint ideological venture of the U.S. anti-communism and anti-colonialism in the field of epistemology and modern humanities. Area studies emerges in the United States and in Western scholarship out, as I already mentioned, collaboration, but really planned collaboration between these philanthropic foundations. Before all, it was Ford foundations. U.S. government, universities, military, intelligence agencies, etc. It was generated by the need of the USA for knowledge to administer the growing number of populations falling under the sphere of American influence. In short, the need to rule over a significant part of world. Area studies is an epistemology of a global governmentality of the United States. And the result was a rapid institutionalization of a new geography of knowledge and power, and performatively production of new spaces called areas. By 1966, in 34 major United States universities emerged new infrastructures of training, academic research, publication, institutes of interdisciplinary advanced degree granting area studies. You could, in the mid-60s, have a PhD in Soviet studies. And these Soviet studies were the first Soviet and China studies. The new discipline divided the world in more or less boundable areas, supposedly united by social and cultural features, and understood as comparable and thus separable unities. When we say Middle East, we think it's geography, it's territory. It is performative product of area studies. So, the new areas of the world emerged: North America, Latin America, Western Europe, Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe, the idea is as a concept, as a field of research, is a product of area studies. So Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia, and Australia, New Zealand. The division of the world created new maps of domination and exploitation based on alleged scientific authority and objectivity. As I said, they started as Russian and Soviet studies, but you have it already here nearby in Graz, in Austria. You have Südosteuropa Institute. It is called Regionalwissenschaften in German, regional studies. But this is the copy of the original, which is the area studies. And then if you sit for like me in Berlin, and something happens in the Southeast Europe, is it Kosovo problem, Serbia, anything, then Deutschlandfunk, the most serious radio program in Germany, have a call, they call the expert who sits in Graz, a professor, and then he explains to German audience what is happening in the Balkans. And needless to say, there is a huge production of knowledge, of PhDs, of everything. You can, I can tell you that I will later have my own experience with this production of knowledge. Well, this is this story of area studies. This is one example. Another example is, a few years ago, there was in Berlin a wonderful exhibition called in Haus der Kulturen der Welt, House of the Cultures of the World, itself created as a paradigmatic institutions of the Cold War, this institution in Berlin. And the exhibition was Parapolitics, Cultural Freedom and the Cold War. And the introductory sentence reads, after the Second World War, the battle of the systems also embroiled the arts and culture in a symbolic arms race. An example is the so-called Congress for Cultural Freedom. I mean, it was revealed already at the end of the 60s that it was a CIA organized institution with a headquarters in Paris. It was CIA front organization, and it was among the most important patrons in world history, supporting an incredible range of artistic and intellectual activities. It had all offices in 35 countries, published dozens of prestige magazines, was involved in the book industry, organized high-profile international conferences and art exhibitions, coordinated performances and concerts. Philharmonies were organized at, visiting of American philharmonies in Europe, coordinated performances, concerts, and contributed ample funding to various cultural awards and fellowships. A few years ago, there was a paper published, CIA research paper, which was written 85, and it was published, and then Gabriel Rockhill, an American theorist and writer, wrote a wonderful piece. You can find it online, and it's very nice to get this his text in original. The title is "The CIA Reads French Theory on the Intellectual Labor of Dismantling the Cultural Left." It was in LA Review of Books of 17. But, well, it is a paper about CIA operatives who have been studying the complex international trend-setting French theory affiliated with the names of Michel Foucault, Jacques Lacan, Roland Barthes. Rockhill, I quote, "The intelligence agency understands culture and theory to be crucial weapons in the overall arsenal it deploys to perpetuate U.S. interests around the world." And the paper diagnosed the return of the right in France at the end of the 70s. Even I remember, enough old to remember this, I remember the Newsweek cover. I think it was the end of the 70s or 80 or these years, and with new philosophers, Bernard-Henri Lévy and Glucksmann, they announced the end of Marxism. And to quote this, in this research CIA paper, they were delighted by the success of the new right, new philosophers. this CIA paper diagnosed this return of the right in France, and I quote Rockhill, while other tentacles of the worldwide spy organization were involved in overthrowing democratically elected leaders, providing intelligence and funding to fascist dictators, and supporting right-wing death squads, think of Chile and etc. The Parisian Central Intelligentsia Squadron was collecting data on how the theoretical world's drift to the right directly benefited U.S. foreign policy. It's at the same time, the end of the 70s, it is the neoliberal turn, not only by Margaret Thatcher becoming 79 Prime Minister of the UK, but also, if you have forgotten 79, Deng Xiaoping won against the Gang of Four, removing Maoists from the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China, and started neoliberal transformation in China. The CIA operatives were especially delighted by the emergence of these philosophers, Glucksmann, Revel, and their critique on, I quote, the last clique of communists, savants, scholars, composed of how they understood Sartre, Barthes, Lacan, and Louis Althusser. What they found especially important is the disillusionment of the new French intellectual elites with the transformative egalitarianism. The idea of a profound egalitarian social transformation, say revolution, has become in France at the end of the 70s a thing of personal and historical past. Glucksmann and Bernard Lévy, they were leftist as youngsters. So it was also in their own personal lives, communism became, and the idea of revolution passed. So to say today, in today's language of CIA, they were no longer believing in revolution. The endeavor of the United States, its secret services, its institutions and elites to push the idea of a revolution out of the French mind, out of the minds of French scholars and intellectuals, and more generally out of French academia and culture, has in fact started immediately after the end of the war, and was especially focused on French historiography. There is a very interesting book by Christine Ross, Fast Cars, Clean Bodies, where you can get this full story. The subtitle is Decolonization and Reordering of French Culture. In the 50s and 60s, French historians were motivated with generous financial supports to study the structures of longue durée, and ever-recurring historical cycles instead of dealing with social movements and singular historical events. In 1962, many of them, under the label of the Annales School of French Historiography, led by Brodel, moved to the newly established Maison des Sciences de l'Homme, opposite of Sorbonne, an institute outside of Sorbonne, which was, covered with money, while in Sorbonne they didn't have a copy machines. These guys got everything the best. And actually you have it also in Vienna, similar institute, established 20 years later, 82, and with the same name, IWM, Institut für die Wissenschaften von Menschen, which is same type of anti-communist intellectual institution. I was 96, 97, I was fellow at the institute, and I could very, very clearly remember United States young scholars working, students working on their PhDs, which were all about area studies. It was sex and disposition in Romanian village, or I don't know, post-agricultural development in South Siberia or something. Americans, studying. But also from former Yugoslavia, studying Yugoslav rock, anything what comes to your mind could have been studied into your PhD of area studies. This is, a collection and a stockpiling of this type of knowledge. And it was this time, and I spent months with these young Americans who discovered Prague. And at that time, Prague was for them what for American intellectuals Paris was in the 20s. And of course, it was very, very, very sexist, and it was actually brutal in terms how young men were, talking about free sex in Prague better than anywhere else in the world. At the same time, the institute, which was established by Michalski, a Polish philosopher, in close contact with Pope Wojtyla, with Vatican. It was so also sort of, joint venture. Vatican, liberal conservative intellectual elites, Österreich Volkspartei, and every year the elite debates of the IVM would take place in Castel Gandolfo, which is summer residency of Pope. So it is still alive, it changes, but this is originally an institution of the Cold War. To come back to the French historiography, to quote Brodel about the new idea of history, and he called it a history whose, I quote, passage is almost imperceptible, a history in which all change is slow, a history of constant repetition, ever recurring cycles. And Christine Ross comments, I quote, "For what is at stake in the erasure of the study of social movement in favor of that of structures is the possibility of abrupt change and mutation in history, the idea of revolution itself." So, cognitive dismantling of this idea, a kind of well-planned and organized epistemic sabotage perpetrated on the concept of revolution in social sciences and more generally in humanities, is at the very core of anti-communism. So it is deeply epistemic and cognitive concept. As a result, anti-communism appears today disguised as common sense that perpetuates the contemporary realpolitik. So this was made possible by moral, of course, discreditation of the idea of revolution in both general publics and academia. With the 80s, the beginning of 80s in France, and indeed in the whole Europe, France and the whole Europe have already forgotten the revolutionary origins of democracy. Moreover, both France and Europe were ashamed of the revolutionary origins of democracy. In her book, In Defense of Terror, Sophie Vanitch, French historian, tells an anecdote about the so-called calf's head dinner, dîner de la tête de veau. This is a ritual organized in Republican circles. You would serve a calf's head on the 21st of January to commemorate the decapitation of Louis XVI on the 21st. First January of 1793. But 1885, Michel Vauvet, a French historian who was at that time chair of the history of French Revolution at the Sorbonne, and at Sorbonne, these were all historians who focused on the concept of event history, especially of French Revolution, and he suggested to the students, postgraduates, to organize such a banquet, to serve the calf's head. But, majority of students were totally disgusted by the idea. They found it indecent and then rejected. It was no longer possible to organize this ritual, a Republican originally ritual. And Sophie Vanic writes, and I quote, "The calf's head ritual has become non-contemporary, without time being taken to assess it properly. It was impossible now to replay the severed head. That kind of thing was shocking or troubling at least. To put it short, already at the end of the 70s, the idea of revolution was completely discredited in France. And this is also the time when François Furet, conservative historian, wrote his famous book, Penser la Révolution française. It is 1708, in which he writes this famous sentence, French Revolution is finally over, at the end of the 70s. In the same turn, France also discovered its pre-revolutionary past. Now, France was no longer only 200 years old, but 1,000 years old. In the same book, François Furet referred explicitly to Russian experience of Bolshevik revolution and its reflection in Russian literature. I quote, "Solzhenitsyn's work ineluctably locates the issue of the Gulag at the very core of the revolutionary endeavor." So we are back to the CIA ad. We are with the Russian literature. So François Furet traced Stalinist terror back to its French origin, the Jacobin tradition, and located the issue of the Gulag at the very core of the revolutionary event. Moreover, historian American Richard Pipes connected the intellectual atmosphere in the pre-revolutionary Russia, Tsarist Russia, with the ideas of the Enlightenment a century earlier. I quote Pipes, "In each case, the arid terror of the encyclopedia or the anti-Tsarist intelligentsia paved the way for the subsequent bloody terror." So it was already terror prepared in encyclopedia, French encyclopedia. This is why I say that it's possible to think of anti-communism as being much older than communism itself. So, from the perspective of anti-communism and its scientific form in modern historiography, and this is historical revisionism, the very idea and praxis of radical social change, as it is sedimented in the historical experience of both revolutions, French and October Russian Revolution, in fact, of every revolution, is diagnosed as the primal disease which has led to the general disorder of the modern world, and is directly responsible for most of its self-inflicted horrors. But if you now again ask me what is the final blow to the idea of revolution, which was delivered after 89, it was by the massive proliferation of all kinds of the so-called color revolutions, orange, rose, tulip, followed by variety of springs, Arab Springs and etc. Ideally, they should have been non-violent, yet nevertheless, many of the hopes those revolutions and springs raised have finally drawn in seas of blood. Ukraine is not exception here. The culmination of this revolutionary adventure of the West was the creation, I come to where I come from originally, from former Yugoslavia, in the struggle against Milosevic, the end of the 90s, that suddenly in the so-called civil society, there was one new organization emerged called Odpor, which is resistance. And in fact, Odpor, it's a group of young activists. They were involved in the overthrow of Milosevic. They were actually trained in Budapest Hilton, by the CIA operatives, covered with many, allegedly millions of dollars, so as to make them the world experts in revolution. And even, Liberal Guardian hailed the leader of the group, he called him the architect of global revolution. So just imagine, communism is over, but there is an idea of global revolution, and the architect is in Belgrade. The members of Odpor have advised and trained the so-called pro-democracy and pro-Western activists in about 50 countries, including India, Iran, Zimbabwe, Burma, Ukraine, Georgia, Palestine, Belarus, Tunisia, Egypt, Venezuela, Azerbaijan, etc. In the meantime, they have turned their revolutionary skills into the academic knowledge. I quote Guardian, the new but fast-growing academic field of non-violent struggle, the influence of which is felt around the world. And they teach in most prestigious universities in the West, like Harvard, New York University, Columbia University, University College of London. What they teach? They teach revolution, how you do revolution. They even write manuals for revolution, like how to start a revolution in 5 easy steps. Humor and hobbits, but no guns. Of course, never guns. In fact, the fact is, the most of the revolutions Odpor, resistance advised, have failed. But there is one thing in which the so-called West succeeded nevertheless, in making people sick when they hear the word revolution. The figure of a revolutionary has become synonym for manipulation of people, instrumentalization of their democratic will, moral and intellectual corruption, and total falsification of their emancipatory experience acquired in real social struggles. So this is the final blow to the idea of revolution when you have experts for the global revolution trained by CIA. But there is another cultural and epistemic twist of the historical anti-communism. French historian created the lieu de mémoire, how do we translate it? English, Erinnerungsorte, German, places, memory places and memory places. Pierre Nora analyzed this transformation in France in the 70s. I was talking about already this move away from the concept of revolution, but also from the concept of history to the concept of memory. And this is the moment when it takes place in France, so that the end of the decade, actually, history is not the discipline we shall ask if we are interested in what happened in the past. Instead, it is memory instead. This is why the Nora calls and uses again 89 as a threshold to what he calls the age of commemoration, the move from history to memory. This is, he diagnosed, and this is the age of, he writes, I quote, passionate, almost fetishistic memorialism in which every country, every social, ethnic, or family group has undergone a profound change in the relationship it traditionally enjoyed with the past. And he compares this historically grown interest in the past with, I quote, a kind of tidal wave of memorial concerns that has broken over the world. At the same time, he diagnosed that this most important feature of this shift to the memory is it's a close ties between this new respect for the past and memory, and, of course, identity, sense of belonging, collective consciousness, etc. So it is how identity politics deals with the past via memory culture. And this is the moment of translation of, this is what made possible this poster, translation of communism as, again, modernist concept of universal emancipation into a feature of a particular ethnic identity. If you are interested in memory politics, just to remind you, we are in the European Union. European Union has an official memory policy, which means about our memory, it is the European Parliament that decides and shapes the memory culture, official memory culture, memory policy of the European Union. There are three most important resolutions of the European Parliament on memory. 2008 resolution that established August 23 as the European Day of Remembrance for the victims of Stalinism and Nazism. And this was the first time the European Union opened the door to a potential equalization of communism and Nazism. A year later, 2nd April 2009, the European Parliament adopted the resolution on European consciousness and conscience and totalitarianism. And it was supported by vast majority of votes, almost all parties, German Greens, Social Democrats, all the 533 voted for, 44 against, 33 abstentions, all main fractions. The resolution makes the recognition of a common totalitarian past a precondition of the European integration. I quote, "Europe will not be united unless it is able to form a common view of its history, recognizes Nazism, Stalinism, and fascist and communist regimes as a common legacy." The third and the most explicit so-called Polish resolution and most anti-communist is the European Parliament resolution of this 19th September 2019 on the importance of European remembrance for the future of Europe. Again, majority of votes, almost all. It states, I quote, that the Nazi and communist regimes carried out mass murders, genocide and deportations and caused a loss of life and freedom in the 20th century on a scale unseen in human history. And the resolution also explicitly expressed, called for the removal of monuments and memorials glorifying totalitarian regimes. I come originally from Croatia. They did it already in 1992. 3,500 partisan monuments were systematically by the Croatian army destroyed, among them masterpieces of abstract plastic in things you could later, many years later, see as photographies in New York, in MoMA, but they did not exist in the reality. They were systematically destroyed together with 16% of book stock in public libraries in Croatia. Almost 4 million books scrapped. So, the resolution, in short, there is no place for the idea of revolution within the official culture of memory of the European Union. And let me now close it by recalling a conference I participated 2 years ago on the island of Vis in Croatia, organized by Croatian and Greens and Southeast Greens, also German European Greens. The topic was the degrowth and climate justice. In the announcement of the conference, the organizers claimed that tackling these problems of climate change and degrowth is a matter of, I quote, substantial social change that implies a longer period of time spanning generations. If you think what is the time span of a generation, it's probably 30 or 40. You have within 100 years like 3 generations. So it's the project is about saving the world from climate catastrophe in the next few hundred years. But what if the substantial social change necessary to save the planet and the humanity as a whole is not fast enough? What if by the time it is finally completed, it will be already too late for both the planet and the humanity itself? Take the problem of the Paris Agreement. The idea was 1.5 degrees Celsius since the pre-industrial level, and this was the task. It's already now clear that this target will be missed. More concretely, the global emissions must peak before 25, which is 2 years, and be reduced 43% by 2030. First half be reduced in 7 years. This is why United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres recently said, I quote, "Time is running out. Irreversible climate tipping points lie alarmingly close." Take the concept of tipping point. You know what is tipping point? This is what has replaced the concept of absent revolution. The concept of tipping points was introduced by the IPCC 20 years ago. It is usually explained by picture of a person rolling a ball up the hill. Anytime you push the ball uphill, it turns back. And you push it, but the moment you are on the top of the hill, you push it a little bit, and it rolls down, and you cannot catch the ball. And this is called, metaphorically, this stays for the tipping point. To put it short, the small change will trigger a system shift, collapse, just a little, the last push. And now, according to the report, this tipping point is around the corner. We are talking in fact about next few years. The so-called substantial change, as I said, 7 years. Otherwise, it will be too late. The time is now measured by years, not even by decades, and not by generations. Behind the narrative of tipping points, of the irreversibility of the change, there is obviously a different concept of time, a different temporality. To put it short, the talk on tipping points discloses the change we call global warming as an event, not as a longue durée process. It has probably been, but it is becoming event within the concept of tipping point. It is not, to quote Brodel again, a history whose passage is almost imperceptible, a history in which all change is slow, a history of constant repetition, ever-recurring cycles. And this is why I believe that the concept of revolution must find its way back to our political and historical imagination. And this is why the anti-communism that has erased this concept from our historical experience, from our knowledge, And finally, from our political imagination is a life-threatening ideology. I mean, an ideology that threatens the human life on Earth. Thank you.